Okay, let's talk about the second pillar of flipped learning, that learning culture. We've already have the flexible environment. Now what we need is a learning culture. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that learning culture means it's not based on teaching. It's based on learning, which means the focus needs to shift from what the teacher has planned to what the student needs. And that is quite a shift to take place. Now, to be clear, understand that as we move forward, we still have intentional content and professional educator that we need to talk about. So this is not the student making demands on the teacher, but the teacher using all the tools, all the experience, all the training, and all their wisdom to make wise educational choices to help students get from where they are to where they need to be. This isn't always such a straight line. That's why we need to create a learning culture. We live in a world in which we like to check boxes. I'm a list guy, and if I have a list of things to do, I usually start at the top of the list and move right on down, and I love when I can check something off. Sometimes I'm real tempted to check something off when it's not quite done yet, just because I'd like to check it off. Our students are the same way, and we need to make sure that it's not the checking off of the box, whether it be an assignment or a test or a project or a chapter or a unit or whatever other subdivision of learning we like to place over the top of education. We need to make sure that the student is focused as much as possible on learning and understanding or mastering a concept. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But one of the things that we have to do as teachers is control what we can control. And so a learning culture means that we're not just worried about homework, quiz, test, or paper, vocabulary quiz, test. And that is not the end-all be-all. Our goal is to set a little bit broader learning goals. You need to be able to, and whatever that is. And what you'll find is when you flip your classroom, it might be about videos initially, it might be about taking things and putting them in individual and group spaces, but when you find yourselves breaking the walls of the classroom, what you'll also find is it muddies the variation in assessment. It also muddies what you consider as a learning process. It also muddies what's considered necessary for the classroom. Do the quizzes all need to be in the classroom, or can those move to the individual space? And those quizzes, are those quizzes summative? Are we just doing them for grades? Or are we doing them formatively to determine what do students know now, and therefore what do they need me to add in so that they can get to their learning goal? And when we start moving from all quizzes and all assessment is summative to at least some quiz and some test is formative, now we've really made a shift in many of our traditional classrooms. I know it was a big shift in my classroom. And so one of the things about this learning culture is, yes, about getting the students to understand a broader picture of learning rather than get my homework done, get my homework done, get my quiz, get my test, get my grade, whatever grade means in terms of learning. Now it's also the teacher learning that not everything I have to do needs a grade attached to it. Sometimes the activity is just part of the learning process. It also means, though, that we need to make good choices on what some of that content is, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So if we want a learning culture, it means a culture in which both the student and the teacher are focused on what the student knows, what the student needs to know, and how we can bridge that gap in between. And that may not be exactly the same for every student. That's also a shift in thinking. And in a traditional classroom setting, I personally always had trouble with that concept. In fact, I still do to a point. Because in that traditional concept, there was no flexibility because I had to get through section 1, section 2, section 3. We had to get from Romeo and Juliet to the cast of characters to the way it's written to the thematic elements. We had to get from this to this to this according to my lesson plans. And now that idea is shifted, and some of the items that I put into my digital instruction blocks, which again we'll get to, they're not for every kid. And not every kid has to do everything. And it doesn't necessarily fit all within the classroom space anymore, but that's okay, because remember, we're no longer limited to the 43, 47, or if you're really lucky, 52 minutes between one bell and the other bell inside those four walls. You can expand your classroom, which means you can expand your students' view of what learning is. But before we can expand a student's view of learning, we have to expand our view of learning, and in particular, teaching to learn. So, stay tuned. We'll come into the next section here in a little bit as the Illinois Flipped and Blended Learning Network brings you the Flipped Classroom.